Hello, everyone. Um, I'm back. Welcome to History Valley. The internet had a little bit of a hiccup there in the previous stream. I'm back now. Um, man. All right, we got two viewers. Okay. If any of you have any questions I missed, please re-ask the questions in the live chat. Just ask again, and I'll get back to them and answer. Impaler, I think the internet's fine now. You can rejoin if you want. Victor Jordan says, "Who do you think the real Jesus was?" The real Jesus, okay, not the one Paul's talking about, not Monobasis, the New Testament Jesus. We're talking about the real one, the real guy. Well, that's the guy that Pilate nailed to that cross. The brother of James, Jesus, the brother of James, that Paul talks about in Galatians. That's the guy we're talking about here. That's the real guy. Hey, Impaler. Crystal, I'm
Hey,
glad you're back. Hopefully the internet doesn't give out again. It's been working pretty fine lately, so I don't know what happened there. Um, Brett Forsyth says, "Bummer, you were on a roll." Well, that's no problem. I can get back on the roll in a minute. Victor Jordan says, "And the Jesus related to James and Peter." Well, as far as we got here, I mean, if Lawson is right, and that the crucified Jesus at the hands of Pilate is the son of Judas the Galilean, which I suspect he's likely to be correct, then James and Simon, the sons of Judas the Galilean, mentioned by Josephus, are probably Peter and James the Great from Acts, and Peter being Cephas. I mean, well, I don't know if Peter is actually is the Cephas in Galatians. There's an issue there I'm going to talk about later. Brett says Mark is most likely the son of Peter, so he would be Peter's contemporary. My problem with that is that Mark being Peter's son is mentioned in I think in Second Peter. First and Second Peter are forgeries, unfortunately. So that's not good news there. Not very reliable evidence. Victor says it's like we don't really know nothing about the historical Jesus. Well, barely. I would say barely, and that's based on the Dead Sea Scrolls and what Josephus says. They don't. I mean, and here's the other thing. A lot of people don't understand this, but Josephus is very vague about many of the people he mentions in his text. It's him saying he mentions one guy barely, and then moves on to the next guy. He does that very often. People suspect that the Jesus mention is a complete forgery um, because of that, but no, that's the way Josephus writes. He does that often. It's annoying, but that's just the way he is. He's a very vague dude when it comes to historical figures. Um, Now, I suspect that the mythical Thomas from the Gospels is Theudas, that guy that got beheaded at the Jordan River on 46 CE at the hands of Governor Cuspius Fatus. And I don't think he was actually Jesus' twin brother. That's probably a Greek play from Apollo and Artemis, whom are twins. Uh, Now, what did Eusebius do? How much did he modify in Josephus? Well, he made Jesus look more like the gospel Jesus. That's what he did. He made it look. He forged the mention of Jesus rising from the dead after 3 days. Josephus didn't write that. Jesus did not believe he was the Christ. Origen of Alexandria from the second century tells us that Josephus called Jesus the so-called Christ because he doesn't believe Jesus is the Christ. And Origen was angry about that, furious. He says he was even more angrier at Josephus for saying that it was the death of James that caused the temple to be destroyed in AD 70. In other words, he blamed the Jewish revolt on the death of James, which is interesting. And it's also to think something like that is anti-gospel because the Gospel of Mark wants you to think it's the other way around. Jesus' death led up to the whole war, but that's not true. James was more important than Jesus. Well, long shot. And that's something that Professor Eisman definitely gets into a lot in James, the brother of Jesus, because we got more literature about James than anyone else in the entire New Testament, practically. And he's pretty much right about that. Uh, James is more like the bigger player here, and Jesus is being twisted by Paul into some post uh, humus identity theft. And what I mean by that is Paul has taken this Jesus, disassociating him from the brother of James completely. That's why Paul fails to mention Pilate, because he's not talking about the Jesus, even though he kind of wants people to think that, and that's why in Galatians he makes the equation between Jesus and his Jesus by saying the Lord is the brother of James. But in the very next verse, Paul says, "I'm not a liar." Galatians 1:20. Immediately after he states James is the Lord's brother in Galatians 1:19, he's saying, "I'm not a liar." So somebody called him a liar for calling James the Lord's brother, which is a very big deal, because it means that he was equating his Jesus with a different Jesus, and the Jews that called him a liar were aware it's not the same person.
Can I interject for a second? I want to answer the person who asked, like, is there a historical Jesus or
Okay.
who was he? This is the problem with the Bible and the whole Jesus thing. If Jesus really existed, we don't know. The only thing we know about Jesus is from the Bible. And the Bible is just a lot of fabricated make-believe stuff. There's no DNA, there's no bones. And this is the problem I have with Ellis. The one major problem I have with Ellis, he has no credentials whatsoever. I spend weeks and days trying to find his credentials. None. So when someone doesn't have credentials, you really have to take what they say with a grain of salt, because their claims are uncredible, because you don't know where they got their sources from. And what's starting to irk me about Alice and his fans, they don't think credentials are important. Well, yes, they are, because historians are trained to look at the sources through a historian point of view. You cannot look through history through modern eyes. The moment you do that, everything is incorrect. You need to look at history through the culture within that time period.
Right.
Second, Alice, does he even speak a second language? Do you know?
As far as I can tell, he seems to act like he does, but I've never seen I've never seen him confirm, but he does or doesn't. Um, and that's as far as I'm aware of. And here's my comment on that. The closest thing that I call credentials, before someone actually gets them, if anyone is pursuing to get those credentials like I am, uh, at least talk to other PhDs in the field. Talk to them at least. That's a start. Do what I'm doing. That's essentially all I ask. If someone's at a beginning stage, at least do that, and then I'll consider your opinions. But until you at least do that, I have to set it aside. And you got a lot of these people commenting on my channel, Ralph Ellis fans, trying to convince me of his theories. I'm like, listen, guys, I wrote his books. I spoke to the man on video. If he himself can't convince me, then how can you, the Ellis fans, possibly hope to convince me? You're the last people that I would be convinced by. Actually, not even the last. There isn't no last, because nobody can. Ellis's Ellis's theories, like today, I actually looked at his books again, because I'm gonna write a huge article on Ellis's claims. Like, I'm gonna start from the top and top and get to the bottom. And Jesus Last of the Pharaohs, he makes the case that Jesus lived in the 8060s. I can't remember if he made his claim that Jesus was a Persian prince in that book. However, in Cleopatra the Christ, he definitely does. He claims Jesus had a Parthian and Roman lineage. Parthian is Persian, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know that. They were called Parthians in the first century and late first century BCE. Anyway, um, okay, yeah, he did make that claim in Jesus Last of the Pharaohs. He just didn't get to the Cleopatra part yet. I remember that now.
Yeah, and there's
Um,
no evidence on that either because we don't know if Jesus existed. And that's another thing that he doesn't get about. He is so certain that Jesus is connected to all these historical figures, but he has no evidence to back it up. He's just making claims out of thin air. And
mm-hmm.
another thing that irks me about his theories, he's absolutely sure what Cleopatra looks like. He doesn't take into account that historians still today are debating if she was an attractive woman or not. Because he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't take into account that Photoshop is not a real thing. This is the problem. Before the invention of the camera, you couldn't trust a sculpture or paintings of what the historical figure looked like, because if this historical figure was a little bit on the ugly side, the artist can make them beautiful. And Queen Elizabeth I always demanded her artists always paint her beautiful. So no matter how old she got, she was always painted beautiful. So he doesn't put that in account that we don't really know what Cleopatra looks like. And he also has to
Very
take in,
true.
yeah, he also has to take into account, like, depending who you ask, some people thought she was beautiful, like the people who really liked her, but the people who didn't like her created propaganda and said she was ugly and mean. I mean, vague
Mm-hmm.
media is nothing new either. Politics hasn't changed. And he also doesn't take into account the point at those times where a propaganda, they always made the figures more masculine. It didn't matter if you were female. So we don't really know. But he's so certain he knows. Well,
Right.
no, he doesn't know. And that brings me to my other criticism of him. He's absolutely sure that coin that he always says is Jesus. Well, again, we don't know if Jesus was a real person. There's no records that he was a real person. And we don't even know what he looked like. All the paintings that we know that he might look like came from artists. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking he's just taking what artists views of Jesus, because we don't know if Jesus had a beard. We don't know if he was royal. Did he stay out of the sun? Did he have a tan? We don't know. We don't know what he looks like. Like, looking at that coin, it's like seeing Jesus in your toes. We
Hmm.
don't know. And I swear, he probably sees Jesus in his coffee daily.
Perhaps he does. At best, based on what Josephus says, what we got is an ordinary Jew called Jesus that was a rebel crucified by Pilate, and that's it. And the way I look at it is that's basically the historical. That's basically the historicist view. But a lot of people, I think, misunderstand the historicist position because, in a way, historicists aren't saying Jesus actually is a historical figure. What they're saying is that the New Testament Jesus did not exist. That's what historicists say, which is essentially the same thing that mythicists say. However, they're saying that the New Testament is taking historical events and basing a fairy tale, a mythical tale meant to convey a point, whether it's propaganda or not. But in the end, Jesus is a literary figure. Um, some call me a histomythicist because of that. Um, because I'm a combination of historicist and mythicist in one word. Because I see that the Jesus in the New Testament didn't exist, but somebody got crucified during Pilate's reign, and that's essentially as far as I go. But let's talk about the free magi, because Ralph Ellis puts a huge emphasis on the free magi in the Gospels. He says, "You see, you got free Persians coming to visit Jesus, so that means he must have had Persian royalty." And I asked him on the debate, does Paul mention the free magi? Paul doesn't mention the free magi. And even if he did, I would be extremely skeptical. But the fact that he doesn't is even better, because Paul had no knowledge of this claim of a Persian royalty, none. Just in none of the documents that we have before the Gospels um, claims that either. But he says, well, the gospel story has to be telling the truth. You can't make up a story about a fictional king somewhere in Judea. You
Yes, you
can't.
can.
Well, yeah, you can, because Eusebius did it in the 4th century. King Abgar V of Edessa, he did not exist. That king's a fraud. It's a fake king. Nobody mentioned that king ever before Eusebius. Ever. And Professor Eisman demonstrated Eusebius um, uh, not Eusebius. He said the doctrine of Addai, the King Abgar V and the doctrine of Addai, is actually talking about Monobasis or King Basus from Josephus' text. They were married to the same queen, Queen Helena of Adiabene or Edessa. But that's a problem, because that's a big problem for Ellis, because the older sources, 2nd century sources, tells us that Basus's grandfather was called Ptolemy. While 5th century sources claim, no, King Abgar, because they're really talking about Basus, but King Abgar, they say, had an Arabian ancestry. And Moses of Corinth, scholars have long recognized that Moses of Corinth is wrong. Like Robert Thompson, for example, who translated the history of Armenia into English. At least one of the guys that did. He said, from I remember, he made the same point too. And I can tell you how Moses of Corinth got confused. That's why Moses of Corinth is unreliable. And Ellis says Moses of Corinth is a very reliable source. He's giving us missing information that Josephus is covering up in the 1st century. I'm like, okay, so we're going to be using a 5th century source, which is making mistakes, and we can see them in front of us, right in front of us, contradicting Josephus, contradicting Tacit. It's contradicting numerous sources from the 1st century and early 2nd century. And you think the 5th century historian is more reliable? Nonsense. Moses of Corinth, what he did was he read Tacitus, and he saw this king called King Akbaris of the Arabs. And what did he do? He says, well, that sounds like King Abgar from Eusebius. So he says, he has an Arabian ethnicity. Eusebius never said Abgar had an Arabian ethnicity. Never. In fact, nobody said that about King Abgar until Moses said it. So he made a mistake. And what's worse, King Abgar V, as it is, he is a mythologized version of King Basus. His death was moved to the wrong date. He dies in AD 50. No, Josephus said he died in 31 AD. And also Ellis makes the case, the doctrine of Addai is real. You see, he received letters from King Abgar V, and King Abgar V sent letters to Jesus. So a mythical king is writing to a literary figure. That's funny. And we're saying that's real. And nobody before Eusebius ever mentioned that doctrine. That's a complete forgery. That is hilariously a forgery. So King Abgar V, but you see, what Eusebius was doing there, he was trying to place the literary Jesus in the New Testament further into history. What he was doing is, well, if I can disassociate some of them anti-circumcision, adiabene theology being taught by Paul out of the New Testament, what I can do is I can say that Jesus was receiving letters from King Abgar V. That would make him more of a historical figure. If then I'll say that Jesus wrote letters back. See, King Abgar V starts, you see, here's what's funny. Eusebius, what's so funny is he even read the New Testament, and we can tell he's taking things out of the New Testament, merging them with things from Josephus, putting them in the Doctrine of Magi, and clumping them together. He's taking stitches and stitching them together. So what he's doing is he says, so King Edward V wrote letters to Jesus, and Jesus wrote letters back. Yeah, okay, I already said that part. Now, why did King Edward V write letters to Jesus? This is the funny part. He has leprosy, according to Eusebius.
What? That
Well,
makes no sense.
and here's what's funny. Who had leprosy according to the New Testament? Simon the leper. So Eusebius is stealing these things from the New Testament and claiming King Edward V actually had leprosy. So now he's at this point he's already making crap up. He's been making crap up from the start. So what's the next thing that he does? Well, I can tell all of you where he got the idea that King Abgar wrote to Jesus, because Josephus says that King Bazus wrote to his son Azates. He sent letters to Azates, not to Jesus, to Azates, a completely different person. So what he says, oh, he wasn't really writing letters to Azates. He was writing letters to Jesus. But when Ellis sees that, what does he say instead? Well, no, that's evidence Azates is Jesus.
But see, again, there's no evidence that real Jesus existed. So how can Jesus, that we don't know existed, write a letter to somebody else if there's no evidence that Jesus wrote a letter?
And the best part is he wouldn't have. James and the family of Judas the Galilean were enemies of the Babylonian Jews. We're told that by Josephus himself. The Babylonian Jews refused to come to the aid of the nationalistic Jews during the Jewish revolt when it broke out. He tells us that in the Jewish Wars in the preface. And the other thing is, on 4 BCE, as Josephus tells us in Antiquities, the Zealots attacked the Babylonian Jews. They invaded Babylon. He tells us that in Antiquities 17. I think it was chapter 17. Yeah. Okay. He tells us that, though. I know that for sure. And that's one of the best examples that I have, that the Babylonian Jewish kings, that's the idea of any, were Roman client kings. There's loads and loads of evidence that they were Roman puppets. They were Roman client kings, like the Herods were. They are the last people to be starting revolts. They would not start revolts against the Romans. In fact, they helped the Romans many times. In fact, I even claim the pro-Roman Jesus, the idea to develop a mythical pro-Roman literary figure that Jesus is. They developed this character to be a mythical Roman client king, which parodies the role of the Adiabeni and also the Herods. And that's why in Mark's gospel, he's not anti-Herodian. People need to realize that. Mark never spoke bad about Herod the Great. Matthew does. The author of Matthew was anti-Herodian for whatever reason that was. So you have different people with different opinions writing gospels. Another thing that's also, yes, that is a problem.
Because we don't know who the authors are. No. And it's quite clear one person's writing this and another person's writing this, and they're just putting whatever their thoughts, and because they have an agenda, they don't care if this part doesn't match us this part. And here's another problem with the Bible and why it doesn't make no sense. It was taken over by foreigners that do not understand Middle Eastern culture, the language, or the mindset. So that's why there's a lot of mistranslations in the Bible, because they didn't understand the language. So you have a lot of foreigners writing something in the Bible that they don't really understand.
Right.
It's important to understand the original language that you're translating from. Another problem with translation is, if anyone has spoken a second language like I do, when you translate something into another language, the original meaning is lost. It just happens. It's very hard, because how you say one thing in another language, it's not how you say it in a another language.
Right.
So the meaning is lost.
Right. And the thing is, um,
And that's what Ellis doesn't understand. And that's
right.
why Lawrence corrected him on his Hebrew. Because that's also another problem
Um,
with
his
translations.
name is Chris. It's his name is his last name is actually Lawson, Christopher
Oh,
Lawson. Yeah,
Lawson.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And that's another thing. Like different languages have different alphabets. They
Hmm.
use different characters. If you're going to
Yeah,
translate it into Roman letters, sometimes you don't have in your alphabet to make that certain sound that's in their alphabet.
that's very true. Yeah. And other things that, going back to Eusebius, other mistakes he made some very serious mistakes. Now, I think these mistakes were actually done on purpose by Eusebius. Because, again, what is Eusebius doing? He's harmonizing different Jesuses together. I'll give an example. The Doctrine of Adi mentions a governor called Ulbinus. Now, even the translator left a comment on the Doctrine of Adi when he translated it into English and said, okay, that's Governor Albinus that Josephus mentions. That's just very obvious. That's a no-brainer. Now we have a problem. The Doctrine of Adi claims that a Governor Albinus reigned during the time of Emperor Tiberius. It even claims that he received letters from Emperor Tiberius. Okay, no, he wrote letters to Emperor Tiberius. I meant. Okay, so that doesn't make any sense because Governor Albinus didn't become governor until 62 A.D. or CE. Emperor Tiberius died in about 37 CE. So in other words, um, he's writing letters to a guy that died 25 years ago. 25 years before he became governor. So Eusebius had misplaced the reign of Albinus, big time. Um, and that's because when Eusebius read Josephus, he deliberately confused Jesus, son of Ananias, with the gospel Jesus, because that Jesus appeared before Governor Albinus on 63 AD. Because the Jews got annoyed with him, he's spreading apocalyptic teaching, saying Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. And Governor Albinus said, "Oh, let him go. He's just nuts." That's what Josephus was telling us. So Eusebius was confusing that Jesus with the one in the Gospels, again, trying to make him more of a historical figure. So, and Ellis says, no, that's not what's happening. He says, you see, Eusebius is trying. Not Eusebius. He doesn't say Eusebius wrote it. I do. He says the author of the Doctrine of Adi is just trying to hide that Jesus lived in the 80s, 60s. And he made a mistake. He forgot to get rid of Governor Albinus. I'm like, no, that's not what it is. Follow if the Doctrine of Adi is following the Gospel's way of thinking that Jesus is alive during the Jewish revolt because he rose from the dead in 30. So he's alive, witnessing these events. And his second coming is supposed to happen during those events anyway. And Jesus was telling his people in the Gospels, I will be back in your lifetime. The temple will be destroyed when I'm back.
So Ellis believes that Jesus rose from the dead.
No, he believes that Jesus survived the crucifixion instead
Oh,
on AD 70. He says, so you got three men in Josephus's autobiography that Josephus talks about. And he says, well, I saw three men get nailed, and I got disturbed because of my friends, so I ran to Commander Titus and said, please let me take them down from the cross, and he approved it. Two of them die, and one survives in the end. But he says, you see? He says, because Josephus sounds like Joseph of Arimathea in the Gospels, and because he's taking down a man from the cross, just like he's doing too, and because Jesus rises from the dead, I'm going to assume it's an exaggeration of that unnamed man that survived the cross. And because Jesus sounds like Isates or Isis, as Josephus also calls Isates, he calls him Isis. Because that sounds like Jesus, I'm going to assume all that's the same, and therefore the same guy is the one that Josephus took down from the cross. And that's the problem right there, because his thinking, it's circular reasoning. He's taking the Gospels. Oh, the Gospels are totally reliable sometimes. In fact, the Gospels are sometimes right and Josephus is wrong instead. And sometimes Josephus is right and the Gospels are wrong. That's not how sourcing works at all. But that's
Yeah.
exactly what he's doing. That's exactly how he looks at it.
And it just proves again he doesn't understand how languages work. I mean,
No,
he really
not at all.
needs to learn some ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, maybe some Aramaic so he can get his translations right.
Right, right. Exactly. Um, Jeff says, great job with this channel, Jacob. I'm wondering if you could once again outline the idea of Jesus having many fathers. Oh, that's an old one. A couple years ago, I did a video called Jesus Has Seven Fathers. um, although I think I got the number of fathers wrong, but it was many fathers, though. Yeah, Revelation 22:16 says Jesus is son of King David and Lucifer. Uh, yeah, that always cracks me up. Hey God, John 3:16, Jesus is the Son of God. John 10:30, Jesus is God. Jesus is God the Father. Matthew 1:18, Jesus is the Son of the Holy Spirit and Mary. Okay, so you see now all of you can understand why the Trinity was invented. Because if the Holy Spirit is Jesus' Father, but Jesus is also his own Father, but God is also his Father, but they must all somehow be the same person. That's why they invented the Trinity. Because that's they have to look at it that way because that cannot all possibly be true at the same time unless somehow it's the same person. Because you can't be three different people and one man at the same time. It's like a brother. You can't be your own brother. You can't be your own son. You can't be your own father. It doesn't make any sense. That's not That's not applicable. So we have this issue here. So if the Holy Spirit is his Father on one hand, Jesus is his own Father on another. But Jesus is God. But Jesus is the morning star's son, or Lucifer's son, and the son of King David. And when he's the son of Lucifer and King David, Mary's not his mother in that paradigm. So now we already got 5 different daddies.
Is
Go ahead.
is Alice saying this?
No, he thinks Joseph is King Abgar V of Edessa because he assumes that's Jesus' father. In fact, I didn't even get into how many people he thinks are Joseph. That's like,
Because
go ahead.
I have an issue. There's
Mm-hmm.
really no Lucifer in the Bible, and Satan's not the devil.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a lot of people get wrong. The whole thing about Lucifer falling from heaven, it was more like talking about the northern star, the morning star in the sky.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about Joseph is, I only got around to telling you guys that Ellis thinks 24 people are the same person as Jesus. But when it comes to Joseph, he thinks Joseph is 13 to 14 different people. I didn't even. I, the problems with his work, I've only touched the tip of the iceberg. It's way worse. He thinks. Let me outline it for you guys. That's from what I can remember right now. He thinks Simon Magus, Uther Pendragon, King Boris, Joseph, Agabus, Abgar V, Phrates V, Bazus, Monobazus, Judas the Galilean, Merlin, that's 11 people already, are the same person. Aphrahat, son of Aphrahat, mentioned in some kind of late source, that's 12 people now, are the same person as well. There might be a 13th name, but I can't remember right now. But yeah, with Joseph, he's a Frankenstein monster as much as his Jesus is in Ralph Ellis's works. Like, this is how he works. Anybody that parallels Jesus are the same as Jesus, and therefore they must be the same as each other, and therefore it's all one person. That's pretty much how he works.
And this is the problem. He has no credentials. So you don't even know where he's getting all this. And I don't think he understands the sources as well as he could because he has no credentials. Like, where did he study at? For as far as I know, he's making this out of his ass.
Well, really and truly, yeah, the credential thing, I understand that criticism. I'm more concerned with, is he at least quoting the sources correctly? Is he lying
Well,
or not? No, he is lying, and there's ways to prove it. Take
when
in Jesus' Last of the Pharaohs. He admits in that book, Phraates V died in AD 4. But in King Jesus, he says, no, Phraates V died in AD 50. And he says Josephus never mentioned his Phraates V's death, ever. And what he does is when he quotes the mention of Phraates V in Josephus' text, that talks about he's being exiled by his own people, the Parthians. He's been exiled to Syria. He actually left out the last sentence in that paragraph that Josephus wrote that mentions that he died on that date. I'll tell you why. King Abgar V in late Syriac literature in the chronography of Elijah, although he didn't read the chronography of Elijah, he's not really familiar with that source. I am. He was looking at the Chronicles, Zukna and Moses of Koran, and they talk about King Abgar V was exiled from Edessa at around the same time. So because, okay, you have a different king getting exiled, you got a different king being exiled, and because Phraates V was exiled to the same region that the mythical King Abgar V was presumably the king of, he assumes they're the same person. Therefore, he leaves out the quotation from Josephus that mentions Phraates V died in 84 because he wants you to think they're the same king. So yes, he is lying, very much so. He's misquoting the sources on purpose. In other cases, he says, Josephus tells us that Jesus, son of Gamaliel, led the Jewish revolt against Rome. But where does Josephus mention Jesus, son of Gamaliel, starting and leading the revolt against Rome? Not one time. Not even an ambiguous passage talking about it. Nothing. So he is absolutely lying about what Josephus is saying, and he's taking advantage of his ignorant audience, whom believe everything that he says, like a religious person is following a book or some religious book, and without question.
yeah, a lot of his followers are mindless zombies. They're not really listening. They're just like, oh yeah, okay, he said it.
And
It
therefore they
must
say it's true. You see, like, this is how they work. Ellis is right, even when he's wrong. He is right. And everybody that disagrees with him is working for a secret cult of academic religious people trying to cover everything up. And Ellis said he's made up some wild conspiracy theories, even about me. he said he says, like, so Dr. Carey is secretly a Mormon, and I showed everybody where he said that. I showed it on the video that I premiered last night. I showed the quote. You read the end of that giant, huge, nonsensical review that he left of Caesar's Messiah. At the end of it, he's saying, Carrier reads the Book of Mormon, and he says that he was talking about, oh, that's weird. He says that these people that are criticizing me are secretly Mormons. I'm like, okay, so anybody that disagrees with you is a Mormon. Come on, man.
I find that a lot of frauds seem to suffer from some mental illness. They don't like to be criticized. They get really upset. I'm surprised he doesn't think the guy from Australia that claims to be Jesus, he hasn't claimed that guy is Jesus.
Yeah, I guess he's the reincarnation of King Isis of Edessa, a fictional king that never existed. King Isis is a man who never existed, everybody. He came up with that name from a conflation. That king did not exist. That's a fake king. The real king is Atis, died in AD 57, well before the Jewish revolt even started. And even if he lived in that time, he would not have helped the Jews. That's the last thing he'd ever would have done. So, yeah, it's endless. And then here's the funnier part. He claims Middle Age sources are reliable. You know, sources that made up some things about Mary traveling to France and Jesus being in Britain. He says, you see, these are real stories.
Or Mary Magdalene is the painting of Venus, the
Mm-hmm.
birth of Venus.
Mm-hmm.
So he automatically thinks that Mary Magdalene has red hair. But if you look at the Last Supper, painted by Leonardo da
The
Vinci,
Last Supper.
yeah,
Mm.
Mary Magdalene has blonde hair. So once again, he can't be certain.
Oh no, but he claims he is certain. He's got it all figured
Yeah,
out. And he said that several times on video, and I noticed you pointed this out too, because this is a very true statement you made. That only in that debate did Ellis say, "Oh, okay, there might be some problems with my theory."
there's a lot of problems with
A
his
lot of
theories.
problems. So what I mean, the thing is, like, you ever claim Josephus is Paul? I'm like, man, we gotta bring Arnold Schwarzenegger in here because okay, so Arnold Schwarzenegger, you need to take Paul from the '60s. He's got time travel back to uh, uh 37 CE. You need to de-age him so he can become an infant, and then you need to stick that infant in Josephus's mother's womb so that way he can be born again as Josephus Flavius. Oh, and then after that, he needs to time travel forward in time. He needs to become Lancelot in the 5th century to fight King Arthur. But because King Arthur is Jesus, so Jesus is time traveling 5th century. Because I would have to believe nonsense like that. I mean, none of that's even like that's just sci-fi at this point. Uh, because Arnold Schwarzenegger would have to be time traveling like a lot to make even some of these people the same person. It it is ridiculous. Like Jesus son of Gamala, he died in AD 68. Justice of Tiberius died in 101 AD. Uh, Jesus son of Ananias died in AD 70. Monobaz II died in AD 71. Jesus son of Saphius died in AD 68. I mean, you got all these different characters that died. I'm sorry, Jesus son of Saphius died in AD 67. Jesus son of Gamala died in AD 68. I'm not sure if I think I misremembered the dates there for a second. My point is, all these guys died in different dates demonstrably. So how could they possibly be the same person?
And also, Alice doesn't understand where Judaism comes from because he was wrong about that. I forgot what he said, but he was wrong about that
Well,
too.
he says that Nazarene Judaism and Judaism itself ultimately is Egyptian in origin, totally
No,
Egyptian.
no, 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 no. The grandfather of all the Abrahamic religions
Mm-hmm.
come. I'm gonna mess up this word. Zara.
Zero,
Yes,
Zoroastrianism.
yes,
It's
and
Zoroastrianism was originally called Mazdayazna in its original language.
it came from Macedonia, which is now what we call Syria. So he's wrong about that too. I mean, it's like he's so wrong about a lot of things.
Um, he says that the Astra in Zoroastrianism it refers to a star because it sounds like star. And scholars have criticized him big time on that. I forgot the names. There's so many articles ripping his theories apart. I've lost count. And most people have forgotten about these articles because they're like 7, 8 years old. But I'm trying to remind people of these articles and go back and look at these articles. What they're saying is totally correct. Um,
Alice is nothing new. He's been around since like the 90s. I remember
mhm.
him being like in some documentary on TV as a kid.
Yeah. Um, it's really baffling. Like you got his works. I'm trying to tell people his works are word salad. He's got basically there's 600 pages each, but really and truly, he only has 2 paragraphs of evidence for his whole thesis that that the king of Edessa started the Jewish revolt against Rome. And I've demonstrated that he's taking those paragraphs out of context. So they're not evidence. He has none. And what started this whole thing was him and Ellis and I met about over a year ago. Um, Back in the beginning of 2020, late 2019, somewhere around there. He saw the videos I did with Valiant, um, James Valiant, and he says, "Oh, look, Jacob Berman is supporting my theories. He's talking about the king of Adiabeni, the king of Edessa, and similar sources." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm not saying the same things you're saying. I'm not supporting your theory." It took Ellis some time to really notice it. I guess he stayed in that state for a while. Then he got confused for a bit. So he was under that impression for a bit until finally he saw a video of me saying they were Roman client kings, and he got really pissed. Uh, and he made a post about me on Facebook saying Jacob has become a Ralph Ellis critic, and eventually started telling people that I'm suppressing knowledge. I don't want people to know certain things. That that uh that I'm up to something, essentially, some conspiracy theory about me. And I was like, okay, whatever, man, whatever you say. Yeah. And um, I mean, he's just trying to defend his claims, but the problem is all he's doing is reiterating his claims. There's no extra evidence. Because I'm asking all this, show me. All I ask is show me more evidence for your claim. Show me something that you haven't shown before.
And that's the issue I have. Like, where's
Hmm.
the evidence?
Where is the evidence? That's right. And there is none.
None.
And the other thing is, he says in his Josephus' autobiography, he talks about that. He says, so there was this one Jesus that warned Josephus that this other Jesus is coming to arrest him. And it's ridiculous because Ellis's conclusion from that is he says, well, because they both have the same name and they're both talking about his arrest. One's coming to arrest him, the other one's warning him. It has to be the same guy. I'm like, oh, please. Jesus, son
I,
of Gamaliel, was killed for being pro-Roman. He and Ananias ben Ananias, that's Paul's tutor, Ananias of Damascus in the New Testament, at least the mythical Ananias of Damascus is based on him. They were both killed for telling the Jews, you need to surrender to the Romans. So you're telling me that guy is the same guy as the other Jesus, which was a common name, which he claims, no, it's not. It's a rare name. It's a Persian
well, it
name.
is a
No, it's not.
common name.
Yeah, it
Like,
is.
Cleopatra was a common name
Yeah.
in ancient times. So it is a common name.
It is very much a common name. Yeshua is a very common name. And Ellis says, no, the linguists are wrong. He says, Jesus does not come from Yeshua. There's no evidence of that. He
There
says,
is evidence of that. He just needs to
yeah,
know some Hebrew.
yeah, because if I remember correctly, Yeshua in Aramaic is called Ishu. And Ishu is identical to Jesus. And in Latin, you got Isus, and then you get Jesus. And I'm like, okay, so there you go. There's your middle word that's missing there, Ishu. And you can see Yeshua being shortened to Ishu, or Ishu. And I can Isus. So right there takes care of it. Josephus even translated Joshua or Yeshua into Isus. It's not just the New Testament. But he says, no, what's happening is that translators themselves translated it differently because they don't want you to know that Jesus son of Gamal is called Jesus. I'm like, that's silly. He's called Yeshua in Hebrew, so he's called Jesus anyway. There's nothing
Like,
being hidden here.
Jesus is the Greek form
Yes, it
of,
is.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree. What I'm saying is that translators aren't hiding anything.
No, like I said, he needs to do some studying, like take a class, have
Well,
some
we
credentials.
all know that he's well beyond that now. He's he's he he's he's an older person, and here's the thing: even if he was an older person, even if he was young right now, it wouldn't matter. I mean, he's made up his mind. He made that very clear. He's like, No, I got it all figured out. Everybody disagrees with me. He's in on some kind of big giant Vatican conspiracy.
But
Uh,
this is the definition of being stupid.
yes. Mm. And he says Jesus derives from Isis. And then he says Isis is Persian. That's nonsense. Isis is Greek, not Persian. And monobasis. Now, see, here's the thing. Basus's mother was a Hasmonean princess called Alexandra. So it doesn't surprise me they're calling themselves monobasis. In a way, it's a pun on Emmanuel, God is with. So, monobasis. Mono is similar to monobasileus, which means singular king, only king. So, what they did was it's very obvious. They took mono, which parallels Emmanuel, basis, and then together they extract the word from monobasis, monobasileus, sorry, and they extract the word from Hebrew, manu, from Emmanuel, and they created this title, which essentially means God is with the only king. Now, it doesn't surprise me they would call themselves that, because they do have a Hebrew lineage, although they did prioritize their Greek lineage more, and they were anti-Torah. So, there's that. And it doesn't surprise me they're anti-Torah, because even without the Ptolemaic heritage, they had a Hasmonean heritage. The Hasmoneans weren't pro-Torah. The Herodian family largely comes from the Hasmoneans. And they did incest, which was against the Torah. Jesus, son of Gamal, the high priest in the 80s, 60s, he did incest, which is against the Torah. So, now Ellis, he does make the point of monobasis is similar to monobasileus, only king. Okay. Shockingly, I agree with him there. But the problem is, it's for the wrong reason. Ellis says they had no Jewish lineage. So why would they use that title? A combination of a Greek and Hebrew word. Why would they use that title? And why would Josephus call them the Babylonian Jews if they're not Jewish to begin with? That's silly. They were kings of the Jewish diaspora, descendants of the Babylonian Jews that were at the Babylonian captivity back in the 6th century BCE that did not leave Babylon when they were freed by the Persians. That's the reason. But they have no Jewish genealogy at all. So let's assume everything that he says is true for a minute. Let's pretend. Okay. How the hell did Jesus become a high priest of Jerusalem without Jewish blood? I await his explanation. Because as he claims that, he's not only a king of Edessa, a prince of Rome, a prince of Persia, a prince of Ptolemaic Egypt, he became the high priest. You have to have Jewish blood. Even if it's improper, like a corrupted bloodline, you still have to have Jewish blood. No, King Isis, the mythical King Isis Ellis created, has no Jewish blood at all. None. Not an ounce. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, as discussed in last night's premiere, is anti-foreigner. They hated the kings. As even Professor Eisman would say, they hate the sons of the pit. That's exactly what the text says. Don't let those foreigners rule over you. Don't give them your inheritance. Don't let them command your armies. And that was the scripture of the Sicarii, the fourth sect of Judaism, the Messianic movement. So they would not have said, I meant to say, they would not have allowed a foreigner to rule over them, much less would they allow him to take command of their armed forces to fight. They would not have allowed those things. They wouldn't have. And Josephus was very clear. The Babylonian Jews never came to the aid of the Jews during the Jewish revolt. That right there sets it straight. In Jewish War 664, when the Adiabeni worlds were trapped in Jerusalem during the siege of Jerusalem, Ellis lies and he says that they told Emperor Vespasian, we surrender. They never said that. Emperor Vespasian instead gave them his personal security. Okay, so would Emperor Vespasian be giving his personal security to rebels? I don't think so. Roman client kings? Absolutely. But Ella says, no, that's evidence. The family of Azates, they're surrendering to Romans. They led the Jewish revolt against Rome. No, that's not what Ellis says. Oh, here's another lie coming for y'all. I remember watching an interview of Ellis. I think it was on, I can't remember. It might have been on a YouTube channel called Windows to Universe. I don't remember. But he told this interviewer, Moses of Corinth says that the son of King Abgar V started and led the Jewish revolt against Rome. Well, let me show you guys something. I have the works of Moses of Corinth right here. And it doesn't say that. Not once. Not once does it ever say the son of the king of Edessa started the Jewish revolt. And that text, by the way, that I just showed y'all is very confusing and already got a lot wrong to begin with. So it's not very reliable. It's reliable if you want to use it to discuss 5th century events. I don't think it does. I don't remember. But not for 1st century events. Absolutely not. Not a chance. Even if Ellis were correct about that, I would not accept that. Moses of Corinth is a late source that is confused big time and is getting things wrong. So even if he did say that, I'm like, okay, well, Ellis, let's assume he did say that. Does Josephus confirm that? Or at least Tacitus. Does Tacitus, he's a contemporary of Josephus, did he say that too? Neither one said it. So that settles it for me. Ellis, as Lawson himself said, does not prioritize his sources. You need to use 1st century sources. Now, as far as I will go, the latest I will go is early mid-2nd century, but I stopped there. And it depends on the sources. It can't be anything from the New Testament, unless it's Paul's epistles. But Paul's epistles are highly theological, so that's problematic. But nevertheless, Paul's epistles and the we passages, the first-person passages that Acts incorporated, are the most reliable writings from my point of view in the New Testament. But they themselves are not as reliable as Josephus or Philo or Tacitus or the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Paul's epistles are still highly questionable to me. But nevertheless, that's as far as I will go. And that's it, really. That's the problem with Ellis. He doesn't prioritize his sources. He keeps saying, oh, all of these sources are reliable. But then he'll say, but certain pieces of them are unreliable, and not for good reasons either. They're unreliable when they don't fit his premise instead. Like, I'll give an example. He'll say that the Syriac historians, which he claims reveal the truth, he says, well, even they have a bias. Even they are covering things up. I'm like, Ellis, you just said that the Moses of Corinth is like the second best thing to the missing works of justice of Tiberius. If you're saying that, if you're giving such a compliment to that source, how could you say that it's sometimes unreliable? No. The way Ellis thinks is he's hypocritical about his sources. He's cherry picking. He's not saying that. He's not saying for good reason, like, oh, it's because this source is late and it's contradicting an earlier source. No, he's not using that logic. He says that, oh, when it's talking about Jesus in the AD 30s, it's wrong. But when it talks about Jesus in the AD 60s, it's right. The Doctrine of Magi is a perfect example of this. He says, when it places Jesus in Pilate, it's wrong. But when it places Jesus during the reign of Governor Albinus, it's correct. Eusebius is amalgamating multiple Jesuses as being the same person. That's what Eusebius is doing, as I said this earlier. He's creating a fake king that never existed, based on a real king, And then he's having that fake king write letters that he never wrote to Jesus, and Jesus writing letters that he never wrote or received to begin with back to the fake king writing letters to him. And the thing is, we know what Eusebius used. He used Acts. He used the Gospels. He used Josephus. He used all these sources to create this fake con job that is the doctrine of Adi. And you know what's funny? He says Eusebius is a forger. He admits Eusebius is a forger. He says he goes a mile further. What's funny is people don't realize this. Ellis takes the mythicist position when it comes to the testimonium. He says Jesus was never mentioned by Josephus in the 8030s. He'll say Eusebius forged that part. Oh, but the doctrine of Adi, which comes from Eusebius, isn't. Okay, that has to be true. So if that part is true, Eusebius himself, whom he tells us in his own work, Eusebius actually tells us he's a liar. He admits it. He says, I'm a liar. Yeah, I know. I made things up. So it's like, okay, Ellis, so you're choosing which parts of Eusebius' lies are true and which parts aren't. That's circular. That's ridiculous. Okay, so now I do think that Josephus mentioned a Jesus that was crucified by Pilate, but I admit that doesn't confirm historicity necessarily. Like, at least that Jesus in the New Testament existing is not confirmed by that. It's just some guy called Jesus crucified by Pilate. And that's what the original Josephus said. Eusebius modified it. He said, no, this guy is the guy that rose from the dead. It took 3 days for him to, and he added that part in. He said, oh, Josephus believed he was the Christ too, by the way. All that other stuff about that paragraph is a forgery. Most of that paragraph is a forgery. And the only reason why we know Josephus talks about it is because of Origen. He mentioned Origen, a 2nd century church father, before Eusebius said. He talked about James, he talked about John, James, and Jesus. He did. But not in the way he wanted them to. He wanted him to. That's why Origen was angry. Just read his commentary on Matthew. Read his book called Against Celsus. He's pissed off at Josephus because Josephus doesn't say what he wants him to say. That's why Eusebius interpolated Josephus. He was addressing Origen's concerns. If people didn't understand this next part, Eusebius inherited the same library Origen used. That's not a coincidence at all. But nevertheless, Eusebius still has Ellis still has that problem. That when he thinks Eusebius is lying, but he also admits the doctrine of Adi has been messed with far more than Josephus ever has been. And doctrine of Adi was never messed with to begin with. It was a forgery from the start, all of it. But Ellis says most of the doctrine of Adi is real history. That's what he says. You just need to change the emperors from Tiberius to Claudius, and that's what happened. He claims that the interpolator changed the names of the emperor to dislocate it from time. Okay, that's funny because even if you put it during the reign of Claudius, it's still wrong. Governor Albinus is in the AD 60s. He reigned during the AD 60s, AD 62. He did not rule during the reign of Emperor Claudius. Albinus ruled as a governor of Judea during Emperor Nero's time, not before. So it's wrong either way, and Claudius being the actual emperor in the story instead of Tiberius is a baseless claim. Jeff says Lawson's idea of the historical Jesus being the hidden son of Judas Galilean is very fascinating. Have you looked into that more? Do you have any opinions? I at least think the Jesus that was nailed by Pilate, that Josephus talks about. I'm not claiming that's the biblical Jesus. That particular Jesus was likely Judas's son, based on the circumstances. Not absolutely certain about that. I'm close to certainty, but not quite there. Victor says, I will give Ellis and Atwill credit for leading me to read Josephus, but I don't agree with their conclusions. Yeah, fair enough. Victor then says the Christians I think you mean mimicking, I think is what you meant to say there. The Old Testament, and Josephus to create the Jesus of the New Testament. Multiple characters used to create Bible Jesus. Well, yeah. Jesus is a composite figure. He's, as I like to say, the New Testament Jesus is a composite biography. Another way you can put it is a literary amalgam. That's what the New Testament Jesus essentially is. That's why Jesus is imitating the lives of multiple historical figures. That's what he's doing. Okay, I think there's another comment here. Hold on. There we go. Victor says that Christians. Oh, wait a minute. I read that one already. Okay, I guess there isn't another one. Victor says, yes, you are right. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I'm about to head off here. I'll give this 3 more minutes. If any of y'all have any more questions? Anybody? Okay, so nothing so far. So I guess I'll discuss the upcoming free videos in the final 2 minutes. Okay, as I discussed in last stream before it got cut off on the damned internet, we got free videos coming up. The second episode to the Clementine redaction of Paul's epistles. Then the next one will be the second episode of the Ralph Ellis post-examination. Valiant and I will do an episode 2, which is a sequel to the one that was aired last night. We're going to rewatch the entire debate that we did on Myth Vision, and we'll discuss it. Pause it several times here and there to discuss errors and other things that happened during the debate, especially errors on Ralph Ellis's part. And the third video that will be coming out is Eusebius, the greatest forger in the ancient Christian world. So that's the one we're going to discuss more extensively. The doctrine of Adi and the King Abgar V being a fake king that never existed, a fraud. An imaginary figure written by Eusebius, a con artist that's trying to create apologetics for early Christian history. Okay, 1 minute left. Jeff says, great job to host and guest. Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys, the minute's about to be up. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on the channel. Share this with your friends if you want to. Would appreciate that. Would get the word spread. If any of you if any of you wish to support the channel, more so, then check the Patreon out and check PayPal out. If y'all want to send anything from there, I would appreciate that as well. Leron says, hi, Jacob. And Leron says, I came just for the end. You can always rewatch it. All right, I'll see all of you later. Thanks for watching, and thank you, Crystal, for joining me.
Hey, thank you.
I'll see all of you later.